My name is Mario Van Peebles, and I'm down here because in America there's always a struggle between capitalism on one side and democracy on the other. And it's like a tennis match. And sometimes capitalism is winning, and the corporations are winning, and the corporations have the right now to put billions and billions of dollars behind the candidate of their choice, and in essence pick the candidate they want to pick. And you can see it when we have sort of corporate welfare and we're bailing corporations out and they get whole again, and yet they're not giving out loans. I know people that are qualified for loans, and yet they're not getting loans because the interest rates are low and it's easier for the banks and more profitable for the banks to hold on to the money. But what happens every now and then is the people wake up. They wake up from the coma, and they push back from watching X Factor, and they push back from their lives and watching the TV and taking the kids to work, and they wake up and say, you know what, enough is enough. We're going to have to get out here and do something. Black, white, yellow, rich, poor, we're going to have to do something. And initially in a movement, it's always a little tricky because it's hard. It's initially hard to define what the agenda is. If you can't define the agenda, it's hard to define the win. So you've got to, at some point, clarify an agenda, but the agenda seems to be around, at least this point, looking at global capitalism, not just American capitalism, and rethinking the paradigm. I think what happens initially in a movement is we come together because we identify a problem. And you know, Ray Charles could see we got a problem here. So we understand that there's a problem in corporate America, and to some degree we're living in the United States of amnesia, and that history doesn't just repeat itself so much as it rhymes. So you look at the Great Depression, you look at the relationship with banks then, you look at the relationships with now, you look at deregulation, and you start to understand the climate that allows the banks to, in effect, pull off an amazing heist that helps start a collapse, and the folks out here, the 99%, that are paying the price are not the 1% that'll get that golden parachute and retire. So we start to identify a problem collectively. You get the fringe groups, you get the folks that are a little on the extreme side, and as we come together and understand where our common denominators are, we start to identify an agenda. Once you identify a specific agenda, you can say, okay, this is what we want. We, the people of the United States of America, this is what we want. This is our program. This is what we want. This is what we're here for. The first thing you got to do is stay alive. You got to keep the movement alive so that you can start to see people hedging their bets, because initially they'll come out and say, oh, the Occupy Wall Street movement has just some fringe nutty folks, blah, 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 blah. You round a couple more times, they go, well, no, wait a minute, I got to hedge my bet. I may need their support. So, actually I think they've got a good reason to be upset. And you start to see, as we speak truth to power, power ultimately will understand the power of where we're going, the power of the collective. So I think initially, like I said, it's us defining the mission statement and figuring out where we align and staying alive. You've got to keep the movement alive. Once the movement is kept alive long enough, then you can define it. We should learn something from history though, and that is this. If you look at the first movements, the Black Power movement, the women's movement, the gay movement, we learned some very valuable lessons back in the 60s. And what we started to understand is that if you lost your leader, if you had a real charismatic leader, and you lost that leader, whether that leader was Malcolm or Martin or even a Kennedy, you could slow down the movement. One of the things that's very interesting about the Occupy Wall Street movement is it has no leader. If you can't cut off the head of the snake, you can't kill the snake. So it's very interesting that people are being resistant to saying, I speak for all of it. I just speak for Mario. I'm just here like everybody else. I don't speak for the movement. I just speak for Mario. But in my observation of the collective of humanity I see down here, it's beautiful. People are engaged. They're thinking. Like I said, they're pushing back from the TV a little bit and their busy lives for a little bit, long enough to come and say, something's wrong. We got to deal with it. And sometime tomorrow, people will say, where were you today? What did you do? What were you doing, Mom and Dad? What were you doing, Uncle so-and-so, before the collapse came? What were you doing? We want to be able to say we did something.